welcome back to the channel. So today we're just out in the garage with the HAOQI Cheetah. So today I'm going to show you how I do a safety check. So the safety check is something that you want to do to make sure that your e-bike is in working condition. This doesn't just apply to the Cheetah, this applies to any e-bike, right? So you don't have to have the Cheetah to do this safety check and to do this maintenance routine. What do you need to do to keep your e-bike running in tip-top shape, keep it running smoothly? All right, so let's go. All right, so if you get the HAOQI Cheetah, you get this nice owner's manual, a physical paper owner's manual. You don't always get those in this day and age, and I appreciate that. I appreciate physical owner's manuals, and that HAOQI provides one. So we're just kind of flipping through here. So in the manual, you can see that we've got this whole page that's dedicated to safety check. So I thought, what better way than to just open up the manual, go through the safety checks that HAOQI has listed out here. We'll just go straight from the manual. I'll give you my 2 cents along the way as we do things. All right, so first up, brakes. We want to ensure the front and rear brakes work properly. All right, so what I'm gonna do to make sure that the brakes are working, what I do is I usually just come up to the bike and I just grab the levers, right? So just boop, 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 just grab the levers. And then the way that you know that they're working is if you pull them back and you're feeling like the brakes are biting down, you know, it should feel like the brake, like you pull it and then it starts biting, right? So if you're pulling the brake lever and it just feels completely loosey-goosey and spongy and like it never bites down on anything, then that might mean that your brake pad is getting worn out. Or it could mean if you've got hydraulic brakes, there could be the hydraulic brakes, they need a brake fluid in that hose. And if there's any air introduced to that hose, it can make them feel spongy, okay? And so the Cheetah doesn't have cable brakes, but if you've got cable brake, that's a little bit different than hydraulic brakes. Cable brakes have a steel cable in there and you can adjust the tension on that cable. So if you've got cable brakes, they require a little bit more maintenance than hydraulic brakes. The HAOQI Cheetah has hydraulic brakes, which are easier to maintain. They require less maintenance. I'm not going to get into cable brakes in this video because the Cheetah has hydraulic brakes, all right? And I would recommend if you're getting an e-bike, you probably just want hydraulic brakes unless you have some kind of like a really special use case. Like you want to be able to fix your brakes easily out in the field with simple tools. In a situation like that, you might want cable brakes, but for most e-bike purposes, I would recommend hydraulic brakes as they're easier to maintain and work with, all right? So as long as you can pull your brake levers and it feels like the brakes are biting down, they should be good. Of course, when you get on your bike, you want to make sure you just hold the brakes and kind of like wiggle the bike around, make sure that the brakes are actually stopping the wheels and that you can't like roll the bike when the brakes are applied. Right? You want to make sure that the brakes, that they're biting and they're actually stopping the wheel. All right. So some other things that you can run into with the brakes is the pads can be worn. So how you check that is you can come down. You come down and then, I don't know if you can see, I'll try and zoom in here on the camera. It's going to be difficult to see, but just by looking, you can kind of see like how much brake pad is left in there. And I would say generally speaking, you want like a millimeter. You want to see some brake pad material in there, right? Like as long as there's still some brake pad material on the brake pads, you should be good. But when those, like if you're looking in there and the brake pad material seems like really thin, or like sometimes it'll just completely wear off. You can completely wear the brake pad material off and then it'll feel like metal scraping on metal and it'll sound kind of like slippery and squeaky. But so you just want to kind of like visually look in there and make sure that there's still some brake pad material on your brake pads. So you can come to the front brake, maybe we can get a better look over here, but we can see that, you know, there's still like, on my brake pads, these front ones are still like, I would say at least like 3 or 4 millimeters worth of brake pad. These ones look fine on the front. My rear brake pads are beginning to wear a little bit more. Usually those rear ones see a lot more wear. So you want to check the rear brake pads more frequently because those front ones wear out slower. All right, so that's basically it for the brakes. You just want to grab your levers, make sure they're biting down. When you get on the bike, grab the levers, make sure that the brakes are actually stopping the wheels. If the brakes feel spongy, I would first check the brake pad, make sure there's some brake pad material left. If the brakes still feel spongy and they're hydraulic, it's probably because the hydraulic hose has some air in it and you're gonna have to bleed that, and get your brakes sorted out, right? That's part of maintaining hydraulic brakes, is bleeding that brake line. All right, so the next thing that we wanna check in our safety checklist are the wheels and the tires. So that, your wheels and tires, those are important, right? So that is where your rubber meets the road. That is where your bike interfaces with the world, right? So if your wheels and your tires are not in order, it can be very problematic and dangerous. So we want to make sure that the wheels and tires are in good working condition. So how do we do that? What should we be looking for? So first of all, we want to ensure the tires are inflated to within the recommended limits displayed on the tire sidewalls. If we look here on our tire sidewall, we can usually spin this thing around, and then somewhere on here it's gonna say, I don't know if you can see it, the light in here is not shining on it greatly, but it says inflate to 20 psi. Sometimes people ask me, how much pressure should I have in my tires? I don't know. Like, you gotta look at the tire. It depends on the tire, okay? So you gotta look at the tire, look at the sidewall. It's gonna tell you, sometimes it'll say like a recommended pressure and then a max pressure. This just says inflate to 20. So you can do this a number of ways. I've got an inflator, portable inflator, and it also has a pressure gauge on it. So you can see the PSI right here. So this is just like an easy way to use just a digital tire pressure gauge. Okay, and then what I'm gonna do here is we're gonna take off this cover, this little cap off of the valve stem, and then I'm gonna connect my tire pressure gauge to that valve stem. And you can see my tires are at 18 psi, right? So the tire said inflate to 20. Now, when you inflate it all the way, it can be more efficient. You're gonna be going faster. But it's also like bumpier, right? And like more rough. So usually I let a little bit of air out of my fat tires because I like to have a little bit of cushion and take advantage of those fat tires themselves and all that air volume in there. All right, so I don't inflate them all the way to 20. I usually leave a little bit out. So this is 18, that's fine. That's probably what I would usually inflate it to. So I'm not gonna inflate any more in here. I'm just gonna take this back off because 18 sounds good to me, all right? Depending on what type of riding you're doing, you might want to change your tire pressure. Like if you're riding in snow or like sand or stuff like that, where there's low traction, you can lower the pressure way down to like 10 psi or something, or potentially even lower. But for riding on the street, I would say you want at least like 15, at least like 75% of that full 20 psi recommendation. So that's kind of the first step in tire and wheel maintenance, is just make sure that your tires are inflated to the right psi. All right. So then we want to ensure tires have tread and have no bulges or excessive wear. Okay, so let's take a look at the tread on my tires. So these tires, I've put about 500 miles on these so far, and there's still tread on them. You can see that this tread in the middle is starting to get worn down a little bit here. Like you can see there's maybe like a millimeter or like 2 millimeters. That's probably been worn off of these tires by now. So the back one is beginning to see some wear, but that's still, we've got a lot of life left in this tire, probably 500 to 1,000 plus more miles, potentially even 1,500. So we still got a long way to go on this tire. This is a brand new tire. And then the front tire is going to be even more brand new because the front tire sees a lot less wear than the rear tire. There's a lot less weight on the front of the bike. So your front tire, usually in general, this one wears out about half as fast as the rear tire. So usually I buy 2 rear tires for every 1 front tire. Okay, and then that's how you check the tread. And then, so you want to make sure that just kind of look around the tire, just kind of check the sidewall, make sure that there's no bulges or anything. Like, it would be pretty obvious if there was. You know, just, you can just kind of go like this, and as long as you don't feel anything like abnormal bulges or anything like that, you should be fine, right? So this is the sidewall right here. The part that's between the rim and the tread is the sidewall, where you want to look for bulges. Like, if you just inflated your tire, you want to make sure that, like, if you're using a tube, you want to make sure that that tube doesn't get pinched in between the rim and the tire when you're inflating it, because then you can be out riding and that pinched tube can pop a big hole in it and you can run into a problem that way. All right, so then the other thing that we want to do with our wheels and tires is ensure the rims run true and have no obvious wobbles or kinks. So what I usually do, I'm gonna grab a yellow zip tie here. So sometimes, like, I'm gonna get the wheel spinning here, okay, and now you can see, like, when I get the wheel spinning, you can see that this little stripe, this reflective stripe on the side of the tire, it kind of looks like it's wobbling relative to my finger. So it kind of makes it look like the tire is wobbly and it might be out of true. But what you have to understand is that this reflective stripe isn't always true. Okay, like, they just kind of get slapped on there. So you can't just look at this reflective stripe to figure out if the tire is true, okay? So what we gotta do is we want to look at like the edge of the rim right here, right? We want to make sure that the edge of the edge of this rim is spinning true. So what you can do is just kind of like get something that's easy to see and just kind of line it up with the edge. Line it up with the edge of the rim like that and get it nice and straight so it's not touching or anything like that. And then I just start spinning the wheel and hold that. Start spinning the wheel and holding that thing there, and you can kind of see that, like, that reflective stripe looks wobbly, but the rim itself is pretty true. Like, it's not, the rim itself isn't really wobbling. So that reflective stripe on the tire can kind of be deceiving, but my rim still, it's pretty true. Like, I don't see any deviations, any like radial deviations there. So that, what I'm checking for right now is a radial deviation where, like, the rim isn't a perfect circle. And there might be like a high spot or a low spot somewhere where the wheel might be spinning and it would be kind of like looking like it's wobbling. There's other kind of deviations that you can check for. Usually if you're checking for deviations, you want to check for lateral ones first. So that's like this. So like if the wheel is spinning and you see the tire like wobbling laterally left and right, that's called a lateral deviation. And you can tighten the spokes to fix those lateral deviations. And then the next step in wheel truing is to check for those radial deviations. And I just showed you how to check for a radial deviation, and a radial deviation is just where the rim from this view is not a circle, right? So if there's like a high spot or a low spot somewhere, that's a radial deviation, deviating from like the circle that you want your rim to be. All right, and so the final step that's involved in wheel truing is checking what's called dishing. Alright, so there's lateral deviations, there's radial deviations, and then there's dishing, okay? And I'm not going to get into all of the details of wheel maintenance and wheel truing in this video. We're just talking about basic maintenance, but I just want to mention it. Okay, so wheel dishing is inside of the dropouts. You want your rim to be centered, right? In between the dropouts. So if the dishing of your rim isn't correct, it might appear as if the entire wheel is like offset and it's like over to the right a little bit, right? So like if you're looking at your bike and you're looking down at like the gap in between here, there might be a bigger gap over on the right side than on the left side, in between the tire and the frame. This is kind of a good way right here. Just look at this gap and how much of a gap do we have here, right? So it should be even on both sides of the bike, right? The wheel should be centered in between the dropouts, and it shouldn't be like off to one side all funny, right? Because you want your two wheels centered on the bike so that it's rolling straight. Like imagine if this one wheel, if it was like offset to an inch to the left, that's gonna make the whole bike kind of like drift one way, you know, like if the wheel isn't dished. So that's the final step in truing a wheel, is dishing. And to do, you know, to do dishing, the proper tool is a wheel alignment gauge. So this is the Park Tool WAG4, and you got to take the wheel off of the bike to be able to use this tool. I'm not going to do that today. I just wanted to show you, that's how you typically do dishing, is you use this tool, you take the wheel off the bike, you kind of hold this up against the axle, and you take a measurement on the right side, and then you take a measurement on the left side, and then you keep using this gauge and tightening the spokes on each sides of the wheel to pull the rim to the left or the right until it's within dish, until it's dished, is when that wheel is centered in the dropouts. Okay, so that's the final step of wheel truing. We're not gonna dish the wheel right now. That's like a whole, wheel truing is like a whole subject of its own, and I've already spent too much time on it in this video. So, but that's what you want to check. All right, guys. So then the final step of the wheels and tires safety check is you just want to ensure all the spokes are tight and not broken. Okay, so I usually put a glove on when I'm touching the spokes because brake dust tends to be all over them and it hurts your fingers when you get it on your skin. So this is how we check the spoke tension. We can just come in here and just squeeze them. Just grab a spoke group. We got 2 spokes here. Just grab them and squeeze them. Okay, so all of the spoke groups, like you should be able to squeeze 2 of these spokes in this group at a time. So we can just grab this spoke group, feel how tight it is, squeeze it. So all of these still feel tight. You might kind of hear like a little kink noise as you first tighten it, but that's normal. So you just do that, and then you can grab the ones on the other side, make sure that they all feel pretty tight. Now sometimes the spokes on the right side and the left side will have slightly different tension, so it can be normal if the spokes on the right are like slightly different than the ones on the left. That can be normal, but you just want to make sure, just go around, squeeze them all. Like you don't have to. It's not like scientific. Just squeeze them, and if something, like if it feels loose, it's just gonna be obvious, right? And if one's broke, you're gonna know. So generally speaking, like you shouldn't really have to do this. It's good to do it every once in a while, just to double check. But usually, like if something goes wrong with the spokes, you're gonna know. But it's a good idea every once in a while, just kind of squeeze them, make sure they're tight, and that should be good. Next step in our safety check is a steering safety check. So we want to make sure that the handlebar and the stem are correctly adjusted and tightened and allow proper steering. We also want to ensure the handlebar is set correctly in relation to the forks and direction of travel. All right, so let's come up here to the bars. Just make sure that your bars, are lining up with your stems lining up with that front wheel. Right, so just kind of come down, look down at it. Right, it can be easiest to do this when you're on the bike, but I'd basically just get on the bike and like make sure that your bars and your stem and everything is straight with that front wheel and it's not twisted at all. Sometimes if you crash or if you drop the bike on its side or something, the wheel can get slightly, the wheel can kind of get slightly like twisted relative to your handlebars, in which case you can usually just come and like hold the wheel with your knees and then just kind of grab the bars and just kind of twist it straight. But so my bars, they seem, aligned with the wheel pretty well here. Everything seems pretty straight. If something is out of alignment with your handlebars and your wheel, like you're gonna know, because it's just not gonna be straight and it's gonna feel funny steering and stuff. And then so the most important thing with your bars and your stem are you gotta make sure that your stem bolts, so we've got 2 on this stem. So you've got 2 stem bolts here. You wanna make sure that those are tight. Okay guys, so in addition to the stem bolts right here, where the stem attaches to the steer tube of your fork, right? So your fork, it's got that steer tube, it comes up through your headset, and then it's hooked in here, and it's held in here with these 2 stem bolts. So you gotta make sure that these bolts are tight. Very important. Or else you might try to turn your bars and turn your bike, but the wheel might not turn, right? If these aren't tight. So that's very important. I wanted to make sure that I emphasize that, make sure that these stem bolts are tight, and then so the other bolts of your stem hold the bars. Okay, so if and there's 4 up here, right? So you can see up here we've got 4 stem bolts that hold the handlebars into the stem, and there's usually kind of like a little ridged like surface here for some friction. Basically, like, you gotta make sure that these 4 bolts are also torqued, because if those bolts come loose, then your whole handlebar can twist, right? So you don't want that, okay? So we gotta make sure that the stem bolts right here are tight, and also up here, right? And then there's this top cap bolt that kind of adjusts the compression. You know, it holds your fork up into your fork steer tube. This bolt right here is what kind of maintains that compression and holds the fork and that steer tube up in the stem, right? So generally speaking, like when you're setting up your bike, once you get the handlebars up here straight, what I usually do is I'll start tightening this top cap stem. You can grab, what I do when I'm tightening this and adjusting that compression is I grab the stanchions of my fork right here. I grab right here, okay, and then I usually lift up the front of the bike, and then I tighten this top cap. Right, and I tighten this top cap kind of until it feels tight and snug, and then I tighten the stem bolts from the bottom to the top after that. Right, so you want to make sure that these bolts are torqued properly, or like if these stem bolts come loose, that can be very dangerous. This is one of the most important things on your bike, are these 2 bolts. Alright, these 2 bolts right here that hold the steer tube in the stem. Like, if these bolts come loose, that could be very bad. You gotta make sure that those are torqued down, okay? It's very important safety check. Stem bolts. So now, the next step of our maintenance mission is the chain. In the Cheetah manual for chain, it says, ensure the chain is oiled, clean, and runs smoothly. It says, extra care is required in wet or dusty conditions. Okay, so let's take a look at my chain. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. There's a lot of ways you can do your chain, guys. But what I recommend, I don't use chain oils. I don't use chain lubes. I use wax. Wax is what you want, boys. Wax is what you want. And what I do is I take wax, and then I take a butter knife or a serrated blade, and then so wax comes in these big blocks, and then I shave it off. I take a serrated blade and I scrape at the wax, and I get all these wax shavings, and then I mix it with 99% isopropyl alcohol. Okay guys, so just as an example here, we've got some household paraffin wax. So I've got 3 pounds of this. 3 pounds of this for pretty inexpensive, like $15–20. And so I've already got a bunch of it in my ketchup bottle that I just want to demonstrate. So this wax, it comes in these big blocks, but you can also buy like smaller pellets of it. I usually get these big blocks, and then like I said, I just use some kind of like a serrated blade, and then you just start going like this, right? And so this can be a little bit messy. You might want to do it like onto a plate or into a baggie or something. But so that this just to demonstrate, right? Just to demonstrate. So you shave the wax off, but then you can take all these and then dump them into some kind of a container. Sometimes I will use an actual funnel to do this. It'll probably work better, but okay guys, so then what I usually do is I get this stuff on Amazon, so 99% isopropyl, and just kind of put that in there with your wax. And sometimes, depending on how much alcohol you have in here, and the alcohol can sometimes evaporate and this will dry out, especially if the cap is open, that alcohol can all evaporate out and then you'll just have kind of like wax left in here. But you can always just add a little bit more alcohol, get some liquid in there, shake it around. If it's a big chunk in here, you can take a heat gun. If you've got a heat gun or like a hair dryer or blow dryer, you can just take a heat gun and kind of, usually these ketchup bottles can handle a little bit of heat. So I'll just shoot a heat gun straight at this bottle to kind of melt the wax down if I need to. 99% isopropyl alcohol and paraffin wax. I also put molybdenum powder in here. You can also put Teflon in there. But basically, the idea with this is that we've got the alcohol, and that is a carrier for the wax, right? So the alcohol carries the wax. It kind of like makes the wax into a liquid, right? And then it carries the wax onto our chain. And then the alcohol evaporates, and then the wax sticks to the chain. And so this is what I do instead of using an oil, right? So I'm putting the wax on right now. This is how you apply it. You might want something down beneath you because you can see the wax, it'll drip down here and it'll dry. And when wax dries, you know, it turns white. So it's just like any other chain stuff. Like, it can be a little bit messy. You might want to put something down there to catch it. But so this is what I do. It's just isopropyl alcohol and paraffin wax, and I just put it on there like any other chain oil. And the benefit of this is that if we come up here, like, I can touch this chain. So this is the advantage of wax, is I can touch this chain and look at my fingers. Look at my fingers, like, they're not dirty at all. There's nothing on my fingers, okay? So there's nothing. That is the problem with chain oils, is that oils attract dirtiness, okay? So wax does not. Wax stays clean and dry. That's an important thing. Wax is dry. And the thing that attracts dirt and grime is the wetness of oil, right? So that's why I recommend wax. All you gotta do is just, you can buy wax in these big blocks, mix it with alcohol, and then you have this magical chain formula that doesn't get your hands dirty at all. It doesn't get your clothes dirty. It's not gonna leave stains. And it works better than any chain oil that you can buy. Okay, so forget muck off, forget all those. Just get some wax and some alcohol. And this is all you gotta do, boys. Just 99% isopropyl alcohol and wax. It's all you need. Once you start doing this, you're never gonna go back to those chain lubes again. Okay, this is the way to go. Trust me, boys. I just shared an important chain secret with you. Alright guys, so next we're going to check the cranks and the pedals. We want to ensure the pedals are securely tightened to the cranks, and we want to ensure the cranks are securely tightened and are not bent. Alright, so first of all, we want to check our pedals secured to the cranks. So that's right here. This is the crank arm. This is where the pedal hooks into the crank arm. So we want to make sure, if this is coming loose, you can usually see like a little gap here in between this and the crank arm. We can check. So the proper tool to do this with would be a big old pedal wrench. The common sizes for pedals are either 15mm or else 9/16. If you don't have a pedal wrench, you can use, you could use something like a like what is this, a spanner? Okay, or you could use like an adjustable wrench if it's not too thick, right? Like if you can fit that adjustable wrench in here, you could use this too, right? So, but I'll just do it with the pedal wrench because that's what we got. So it looks like on the HAOQI Cheetah are these 9/16. There we got 15. Yeah. So this is, it looks like this is a 15 millimeter. That's the one that fits on there. And then so to tighten the pedals onto the cranks, you always tighten it towards the front of the bike. Okay. So on the drive side, it's righty-tighty. Right, and to do this, what you can do is I usually just like, you know, just hold the crank arm and then you can just kind of go like this, right? Just kind of. All right, so we checked this one, we tightened it up a little bit towards the front of the bike, and then over on the opposite side, you also tighten it towards the front of the bike, right? So I can do it from right here, tightening towards the front, and we did tighten that side a little bit, okay? But actually on this non-drive side over here, this is actually lefty tight. All right guys, so that is the trick to know how to tighten your pedals. It's always towards the front of the bike, right? So tighten that towards the front of the bike, come over onto this side, tighten it towards the front of the bike. So now the pedals are tightened onto the crank arms. The next step is we want to make sure that the crank arms are secured onto the bike so that this whole crank arm doesn't fall off. Right, so usually it's like an 8 millimeter hex or like Allen key, and it's just got this big bolt in here. And how I do this is you can see that it wants to rotate along with you as you're tightening. So what I do is like I'll get it in kind of like a V shape where you can hold on to that. You can hold on to that crank arm, come over here, and then just like really lay down into it with your other arm. And so my cranks are on there really good. You tighten this. This is always righty-tighty. Tightening this in here. So this is righty-tighty on both sides. But yeah, you basically just hold on to the crank, hold it still with one arm, and then put your weight into that other one with the other arm, and tighten it on there. And you just want to tighten it on nice and snug, and it'll usually stay on there pretty good, right? So the next step, guys, is our derailleur. So that's back here. It's our rear derailleur. It's what shifts our gears, right? So we want to make sure and check that the derailleurs are adjusted and functioning properly, shifting through all the gears. Then we want to ensure that the shift and brake levers are attached to the handlebar securely, and just ensure that all brake and shift cables are properly lubricated. All right, so basically, just want to make sure that the derailleur is working. All right. So we've got the derailleur back here. It's connected to the shifter with the cable. So the derailleur works based on this cable tension right here, right? So this cable is hooked onto the derailleur, and then it's got a barrel adjuster right here where you can kind of, this is to adjust the indexing of your gears. And then derailleurs also have a high limit screw that's usually on the top, a low limit screw that's usually on the bottom, and then there's also a B adjustment screw which adjusts like how far the derailleur sits like this just by default. When you tighten this B screw, it's gonna adjust the derailleur like this, and you wanna, when you're adjusting that B adjustment, you're kind of adjusting the distance back here between the teeth on your gears and then the teeth on the jockey wheel of the derailleur, and you want there to be about 5 millimeter gap in between the teeth of your gears and the teeth of this wheel right here. Your derailleur should come on your bike adjusted, and you shouldn't have to do anything, but if the shifting gets messed up and the shifting isn't working properly, you might have to do some derailleur maintenance. All right, so that's kind of like the B adjustment screws. It just controls like how the derailleur sits and the gap that is in between, like in between back here, in between the teeth on your gears and then this wheel right here. All right, so it's kind of like the B adjustment screw adjusts this gap that's in between here. okay? And if that B adjustment isn't set up properly, it would probably just affect the crispness of your shifting. It might not shift as smooth. So then we just want to make sure that the derailleur is shifting. So what I typically do is just, we can see, like, let's get it up. So this is our shifter up here. It's got the stainless steel cable. You can see it's right here. This is the shift cable. All right, so you can see there's that stainless steel cable in my shifter right here. That is the cable. That's where it goes in there. And so when so I can shift my gears here, and that adjusts the tension on that shifting cable so that the derailleur moves like left and right and changes which gear you're in. So I just shifted back into first. So the derailleur would have kind of adjusted this way. And now if I pedal, you can see that the chain is gonna jump up into that first gear. Okay, so now we're in first gear. And then what we can do to make sure that our shifting is working is just go, so shift test. We're in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So then test shifting up the gears. So we've got, all right, so let's do the shift test. All right, so I got on first gear, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, sixth, high. Oh, high, high. All right. So if you're having this where it's kind of like, it sounds like it's skipping and it won't go up into a gear, let's just go up here and make sure. So we're in fifth gear on the shifter and it's kind of like doing some skipping on me. So what we can do is kind of like adjust the indexing just slightly. So if this barrel adjuster right here is for the indexing, so when I start to twist this barrel adjuster to the left, it's gonna move my derailleur to the left, right? And it's gonna want to shift up a gear. So I think that is what we need to do to kind of fix this clicking problem right here. You see how it's clicking and it won't quite go up into fifth gear. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna twist this like quarter turn to the left. Okay, so just like twist it just quarter turn to the left, and then you can see it shifted up into that fifth gear right away. All right, so then anytime that you adjust the indexing of your shifter, you're always going to want to go back and like shift through all the gears. So let's get it back into this. All right, so now that I've adjusted the indexing slightly, I'm going to go through this and just check all the gears again. So we're in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so that's basically the derailleur. You just want to make sure that your shifter is able to shift through all of the gears correctly. So you want to make sure it can shift down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you also want to make sure that it can shift up, right? 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You want to, when you're in your first gear, make sure that you can't shift out and have the chain drop off of here, right? And if the chain can drop down here, you want to tighten that low limit screw until the chain no longer falls down in here, right? And then, so the high limit screw is kind of the opposite thing. Like when you're in the 7th gear, if you try and shift up, the chain shouldn't fall off and get stuck in between. Like if you don't want the chain to come off this gear this way and get stuck in between the frame and your 7th gear, right? So that's the high limit screw is what controls how far this way the derailleur can go. So basically you tighten that high limit screw until the derailleur comes back here and it's in line with this 7th cog, and there's no possible way that that chain could try and shift up out of 7th gear and get stuck, right? So that's your derailleur. Just want to make sure it's shifting, make sure the high and low limits are set right, and that's basically it. Okay guys, so one other thing that I want to mention before we move on from the derailleur is, in order for your derailleur to work properly at all, the first thing that you need to check is this little derailleur hanger, this piece of metal right here. So this thing, it's aluminum. This is called a derailleur hanger, and it's the piece So the derailleur hanger, it comes all the way up here. You can see it up here as well. And it hooks onto the frame right here. And then it hangs down, and then your derailleur hooks onto the derailleur hanger, right? And so the purpose of the derailleur hanger, this aluminum piece right here, is if your derailleur hits something and collides with something while you're riding, the hanger, this thing, should break, and not the derailleur, right? And not your bike frame. So the derailleur hanger is designed as like a point of failure, or like a fuse. So if you crash or if something hits your derailleur, the derailleur hanger should break or bend. However, like, you have to come back here and you have to make sure that your derailleur hanger is straight. Okay, because if your derailleur hanger is not straight and your derailleur is hanging down off of this crooked, like, it's just never gonna be able to shift through those gears properly. So, and there's a tool called a derailleur alignment gauge. I think it's called a DAG from Park Tool. So there's a tool that you can use to make sure that your derailleur hanger is straight. So if your derailleur is like acting up and you're adjusting the limit screws and the indexing, and it seems like no matter what you do, your derailleur just like isn't shifting properly, you want to make sure that your derailleur hanger is straight, first of all, because if this thing isn't straight, then the whole derailleur is just going to be out of alignment and it's just not going to work. Okay, so really, like, before you start working on your derailleur and adjusting that, you want to make sure and just take a look and make sure that the derailleur hanger is straight. Okay. All right, so the next step, we want to make sure that the motor drive assembly and throttle is working properly. All right, so we want to ensure hub motor is spinning smoothly and the motor bearings are in good working order. So what we can do to check that is I just turn the bike on. Okay, then make sure it's in like a pedal assist mode where you can hit the throttle and give it some power, and then just do that. So I'm just gonna hit the throttle, make sure it's working. So when it's in the stand, I've got some tire sealant, some flat out inside of my tire, so it kind of like, there's some weight, there's some liquid, some fluid inside of this tire that kind of makes it like bloop, 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 bloop. But we're just basically checking, like, can I hit the throttle and the wheel is spinning, spinning smoothly. I'm not super concerned about a little bit of like bounciness in the stand. That's just physics. But we just want to make sure that your throttle's working. Make sure that everything seems right. Kind of just let it spin for a while. Make sure that the brake isn't rubbing. It's a good time to kind of check and look at your rim, right? Make sure that the rim itself isn't like wobbling. Okay. But everything, it seems like it's spinning smoothly. If something wasn't spinning smoothly, the wheel would kind of like come to a stop on its own a lot quicker than this. So my HAOQI Cheetah is still a very new bike. All the bearings and the motor and everything is still very new. And we're still doing great, right? So over a long period of time, like 10,000 miles, years of use, eventually you might have to do some maintenance inside of the motor. I'm going to make a video on that where I open up this motor in the future. But right now this is just kind of like a basic safety and maintenance check. You shouldn't have to open up your motor for maintenance for like a very long time, if ever, right? I think a lot of people will probably never have to do any maintenance to their hub motors because they're very reliable. All right, so then I just kind of flipped the bike around, so now we're on the non-drive side, the opposite side of the bike. So the motor cable, it's zip tied right here, and then it's kind of running along back here, and then it's also zip tied right here, and then you can see it goes back into the motor up underneath there. All right. So just make sure that your brake rotor bolts are tight, they're not coming loose. Make sure that the motor cable stays away from your brake rotors while it's spinning. Make sure your motor cable is nice and secure and it doesn't come loose here. You can always check there if you're having problems with your bike. And then you still want to make sure this motor cable doesn't get damaged or anything, right? Okay guys, so the final safety check related to our motor. This is a very important one, so pay attention here. So it's these axle nuts. Alright, so these axle nuts that hold our motor into the bike dropouts. So these are what hold the motor in the entire wheel. These two nuts, there's one on each side. Alright, so every once in a while you want to check these. I would just check them before every time you ride. I would just check with your fingers, just like, you know, just quick before you ride, just, you know, check them, make sure they're not loose, right? Now, there's a number of ways you can tighten these things up. The most common people seem to use is like just an adjustable wrench. Now this, I think this is 18 millimeters is about what this is, this axle nut, the wrench flats on this. So you can always come in here and use like an adjustable wrench and just adjust it to the flats on there. However, you gotta kind of be careful when you're using one of these wrenches, because it's very easy to like scratch up the frame. Especially when you're up, if you have axle nuts on your front wheel, it can be easy to scratch up your forks. The Cheetah has quick release up in the front. So we're just checking back here. We gotta check these two nuts. So what I'm gonna do, what I recommend instead of like an adjustable wrench, is to get like a deep socket where the socket is deep enough to just go on there, to just get the whole socket on here, and then you can use the deep socket to fasten it on there instead. And then you don't have to worry about risking scratching your frame. Okay, so I got my deep socket on here. In my case, it's an 18 millimeter is what I'm using. Seems to fit on these flats, and then just get it on here and just, you know, mine is still very torqued on there from the factory and very secure. But, you know, over time, you know, long periods of time, these can just kind of loosen, because this is what holds the wheel on the bike. So it's very important to every once in a while, I would check before every ride, check it with your fingers, but then also once in a while, get some kind of a tool, and then also just make sure that it's on there nice and good. There's another axle nut over on the opposite side as well, you know, right over here. So make sure that those axle nuts are tightened on there properly and torqued securely. So then we've checked the motor and the throttle, and the final check is just, we want to check our batteries, right? So we want to make sure our batteries are charged. We want to make sure that there's no damage to the battery pack. And we want to make sure that our batteries are locked to the frame and secured. Okay, so on the Cheetah, I've got the dual battery package on my Cheetah. So we've got a 9 amp hour battery right here, 48 volts, 9 amp hours. And then it's got a 48 volt, 16 amp hour that's internal right here. Right, so I just want to check my batteries so I can see right here, I was charging my battery and we've still got this little like waterproof thing that's open. So I'm gonna just close that up and make sure that that is waterproof right there, and no water is getting into the charge port. I'm gonna do the same thing down here. Okay, get this little waterproof thing, stick that in there, and make sure that that is in there when I'm riding my bike. All right, because otherwise it's not gonna be as waterproof as it could be. Some water might get into that charge port, and we don't want that. Okay, so then the next thing is we just want to make sure that there's some juice in our batteries. So on my battery, I can test it just right here. Just hold this button and it shows you the battery gauge. So that's showing full on this battery, so I can see that that one's charged. The HAOQI Cheetah has a battery combiner where it's got 2 batteries hooked up to the battery combiner, and then the battery combiner hooks up to the controller. So we've got 2 batteries hooked up together with a combiner. So how I would check the battery is just turn the bike on and then just look at the power gauge, and it should be full, right? So you just, before you set out on a ride, it's always a good idea to make sure that your power gauge is full and that your batteries are charged, right? And so then, I mean, this is a new bike, so, and there's no damage on my batteries, but you know, just kind of check them. Just kind of every once in a while, just kind of feel them. Like if you drop your bike or if you crash or something, just make sure that like it doesn't seem like anything got damaged. Like if when you're riding and when you get back from a ride, it can make sense just to feel the battery and see how warm it is. And if your battery is warm, I would let it rest before you try and charge it, okay? So I would recommend when you get back from a ride, maybe wait like 10 minutes at least to start charging the batteries. And I would always check and make sure that they're not hot before you start charging them, right? Because if you start charging a hot battery, that could be a problem, right? And so this was the safety check on my HAOQI Cheetah. These are all the things that I check just to make sure that my bike is operating smoothly, everything's set up correctly, we don't have any big problems, safety issues that might cause problems during a ride. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know. Did I forget anything? What do you do on your safety checks before you ride your e-bike? Is there anything that I left out? Is there any additional steps that you might recommend? Do you use a different kind of chain lube? Do you have a better way to explain how to adjust the derailleur? Let me know in the comments, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe. Stay tuned. I'm gonna be riding the HAOQI Cheetah around, modifying it and customizing it. So you're gonna see a lot more of the HAOQI Cheetah in the future, boys. Like and subscribe. Peace out. Thanks for watching.